views expressed are not endorsed by the United States Department of Defense or its components. Welcome back to the Fiverr Podcast as part of USAFA Aviation. Today is episode 18, and we are privileged to have Master Sergeant William Wild Bill Shaffell with us today. Sergeant Shaffell is the Academy Military Trainer at the United States Air Force Academy, Cadet Squadron 25, the Rock-Hard Red-Eye. He serves as principal advisor to the commander of the Cadet Squadron on all issues relating to cadets, advising the commander on a wide range of topics including the health, discipline, mentoring, well-being, training, professional development, and recognition of all 100 assigned cadets.
Master Sergeant Shaffell entered the Air Force in June 2005. He graduated from the Defense Language Institute as an airborne Korean linguist in November 2006, and since then has held a variety of intelligence and aviation positions related to signals intelligence in the counterterrorism and peer competition realms. He has deployed over 10 times with varied joint special operations task forces across multiple locations, handling aircrew scheduling, logistics, and operations, while leading as non-commissioned officer in charge and operations superintendent for over 130 aircrew, and personally flying 502 combat sorties. In 2022, he graduated from the United States Air Force Weapons School, Tactical Systems Operator, Advanced Instructor Course 22A. Prior to his current position, the Master Sergeant was Senior Enlisted Leader at the 14th Weapons Squadron, Hurlburt Field, Florida.
Sir, welcome to the show.
Thanks, pleasure to be here.
So I guess to kind of address probably a question that a lot of you are thinking, right? Master Sergeant Shaffell is with us today, first enlisted guest on the podcast. And basically this is kind of going to be an effort to stay aviation related, but branch out and learn about other aviation related career fields, whether that is on the officer or enlisted side. So yeah, I guess we'll kind of just get into talking about your military career. So I had to do a little bit of research before this episode about what exactly, and I'm still a little confused on what exactly those career fields do. So I guess you're the perfect guy to ask. So I guess what does signals intelligence do?
Yeah, so signals intelligence is primarily what we use in the military, DoD, to gain insight into what the enemy is doing via electronic means, right? So SIGINT comprises comment, ELINT, and PHYSINT are the three disciplines of SIGINT, and that stands for communications intelligence, electronic intelligence, and then foreign information systems intelligence. Don't really do PHYSINT a lot. PHYSINT's a lot of movement of machines and various things like that. But primarily what I focused on in my career is comment. So getting communications intelligence out of various communications devices.
Awesome.
Interesting. So what's the biggest difference between how we conduct signals intelligence in counterterrorism versus with peer competition?
It's a great question. Really, without sounding too, taking it down to too low of a level, counterterrorism SIGINT was pretty easy. The enemy we were fighting, not to disrespect the enemy, it was a long fight between the various counter-violent extremist organizations that we've been engaged with. We're still engaged with a lot of them, and they have changed their tactics and gotten wise. But as far as discipline goes, OPSEC goes, they're not the most OPSEC savvy or the most disciplined with communication, so it made our job significantly easier. Now, there's obviously exceptions of that when you get into your higher level, high value targets that have a little more know-how. It got a little harder. But for the most part, exploiting SIGINT in the counter VEO realm is pretty easy, right? Like we're pretty good at it at this point. From a peer competition standpoint, it gets a lot more involved. For a variety of factors, our competitors in Russia, China, Iran, North Korea are nation states, right? So they have the resources of a nation state as opposed to an organization that's just running around with beepers, cell phones, radios that you can get from any store. You're dealing with more military-grade equipment and a lot more advanced types of communication than what we saw in counter-VEO.
Yeah, so when we talk about the signals intelligence career field, it is a aviation-related job. Obviously, we're in the Air Force. It's signals intelligence. But what aircraft are members of signals intelligence on?
Yeah, so the primary one that you're going to see, the one I started on, and albeit I did not spend a lot of time on before branching off into the wild blue yonder, if you will, is going to be the rivet joint, the RC-135. So that's kind of the the moneymaker of Airborne SIGINT for the Air Force. From a crewed perspective, obviously SIGINT, the nice thing about SIGINT is it can be performed from pretty much any airplane, given you outfit it with antennas and equipment that can exploit SIGINT. But the rivet joint's the big one. The EC-130 compass call is another one. And then there's various other ones like U2, U-28, MC-12 that also kind of dabble in the SIGINT realm.
So, kind of given that versatility and being able to be on multiple different platforms, how many SIGINT personnel are there in the Air Force?
That is a great question. I don't have an answer for that. I know there's a lot, right? So, and you can break us out in between, ground SIGINT and air SIGINT. From an airborne SIGINT perspective, not a whole lot. They're primarily comprised of either airborne cryptologic linguists, and then further into the AFSOC Joint Special Operations realm, you have what's called a DISO or a TISO. DISO stands for Direct Support Operator, and TISO is a Tactical Systems Operator. So think of your DISOs as that soft flavor of airborne linguist that uses their language skills to provide real-time threat warning and situational awareness to a crewed airplane or to a ground team that they're supporting. And a TISO is using their SIGINT knowledge along with their aviation background to provide typically aerial precision geolocation of targets.
And so when we talk about like the three levels of warfare in relation to signals intelligence, like what level of warfare do you think signals intelligence falls under, whether that's strategic, operational, or tactical?
So it absolutely, in my opinion at least, goes through all of those. The majority of my career, at least early on, was focused on the tactical. When you look at TISO specifically, we're a tactical systems operator, right? So we're really that first line that's helping the ground teams, helping the ground force commander get after whatever targets they're looking for. Same with your DISOs, right? They're providing that tactical, real-time, perishable situational awareness to either a crew in the air or a crew on the ground. But as you go up into the operational and strategic, that's really where some of your other assets come in with the rivet joint, the U2, things like that. But primarily your smaller crews, your smaller aircraft, MC-12, U-28, that kind of stuff, is going to be more at the tactical, maybe the operational level. And then really as the size of the airplane goes up, you could almost say the importance of what they're collecting is going up as well.
And so working with different sizes of aircraft and working with different levels of warfare, what's it like being in those types of crewed aircraft with a variety of ranks around you?
Specifically, like the officer and enlisted relationship that exists in crewed aircraft. Like we've gotten a lot of officers' perspectives on it, and we're just kind of curious, like what, on the other flip side, like what was your perspective on it?
Sure, yeah, I absolutely love it. I think it's the best part about the military. Caveat, I think I've got only on the rivet joint about 38 hours, and that pretty much just got me through my initial upgrade training. And then I was kind of plucked away from the rivet joint community to go do soft stuff in the desert as a Korean linguist. And then never went back to rivet joint, right? So I don't have a lot of experience with how that kind of crew mentality works, but a lot of my brethren and friends do, and they feel the same way. It's great. Specifically on the smaller crewed aircraft, right, where you're looking at a crew of 4, maybe a crew of 6, where you've got 2 to 3 officers, 2 to 3 enlisted. The dynamic's just different, right? You lose, I don't want to say all the pomp and circumstance and the customs and courtesies, but it really becomes a very flat internal organization of that airplane, right? Like we go by first names almost all the time. There can be no qualms about feeling uncomfortable talking to somebody because of their rank, right? Because if you do that and you're the only person that notices some sort of CRM issue or an issue going on inside or outside the airplane, and you don't feel comfortable because you're flying with a colonel, full bird, or lieutenant colonel, you could be the reason that plane goes down, right? Because you didn't think it was okay for you to speak up. I've been fortunate enough to all the officers I've ever flown with have done everything they could to encourage that and to make even the lowest enlisted flying with them feel like they're part of that team, so as to not shut that down. But I know that from speaking with other aviation enlisted folk that I've been around, it's not always the case, right? There are some officers that kind of get that big head and you will address me as sir or Lieutenant Colonel so-and-so. And I mean, that's fine. That's your prerogative, but I think that's a terrible thing in the airplane.
Yeah, and so when we talk, the enlisted force has a pretty wide range. Same on the officer side, but like your difference between an airman first class and a master sergeant or a senior master sergeant or whatever the highest ranking enlisted personnel is on that aircraft. How does the relationship differ between, say, like senior NCOs and like lieutenant colonels versus that like airman first class and that lieutenant colonel?
Honestly, I think once you have your wings, it doesn't matter, right? Especially if you are a true expert at your craft. And once your crew knows that you know your job, they don't care what rank you are. I mean, when I first started deploying, I was a senior airman, so an E4, and same thing, flying around with colonels, lieutenant colonels, majors, captains. It didn't matter because the expectation was that you were the expert at SIGINT. And for most of these aircraft, the SIGINT was driving the mission, right? So the pilot's driving the plane, but the SIGINTer in the back is driving where we're going, why we're going there, and what we're doing once we get there. So they really relied on us for young enlisted E4s through E6s to provide that for them, right? And to know what we were doing.
Sounds good. And so kind of talking before you were SIGINT, you were working as an airborne Korean linguist. So what did you do in that role?
Yeah, so I'll give you the theoretical for that because, again, full caveat, I don't want to be stolen honor here. I never flew an operational mission on the Rivet Joint as an airborne Korean linguist. But typically the way our linguist cadre or corps work on the Rivet Joint is you're broken out into some sort of specialty, right? So you have a target set. For me, it was Korean. Obviously, we're going after North Korea with that, trying to collect order of battle information. So whether that's ground order of battle, naval order of battle, or air order of battle, you want to be the expert at that, right? So a lot of our studying was, learning the different bases that airplanes fly at. What airplanes are stationed at what bases? What does ground control air intercept sound like for North Korea, right? Being able to listen to countless hours and figure out, what am I hearing? What's going on? So that way, when you are flying an operational mission, you can quickly relay that to the senior intel person on the plane, who would be a 14N, and they can disseminate that information as needed, right, to the rest of the intel community or ground community, whoever our customer for that day was.
So how long did you spend in the linguist career field, or like what was your experiences like?
Yeah, so my experiences were great. The language training is typically about 18 months, depending on what language you get. Arabic, Chinese, Korean are what's viewed are the three harder ones that take the longer time at DLI. So you go through DLI, you do your language training, you test your DLPT scores, and as long as you score well enough, you graduate. From there, you go on to Goodfellow. You learn your intel trade a little bit there. You go to survival school out at Spokane, do your survival school, and then from there you go on to, for most of us, it's Offutt where the Rivet Joint's based out of, right? So, and then you start doing your check rides, all that. And then once you get qualified, typically, unless you get stolen away to go do something else, you would then either stay at Offutt, where you would base out of, or you but you'd PCS out to one of the DETs, whether that's in England or Kadena, to go fly missions out of there. So for me, most of my linguist time, if you will, was really spent in training, upgrade training, getting my first Form 8 on the Rivet Joint, and then immediately, I kid you not, immediately leaving for Iraq, and then never doing Korean again. So not the Air Force's wisest move, but I'm glad they did it.
And so when you went, was that when you transitioned to signals intelligence?
Yeah, so right around 2009 was when I got my Form 8, and then right around that time, the requests for forces that were coming out of the joint community for enlisted members who had aviation background and signals intelligence was getting pretty heavy, right? So the SOF community needed flyers that could do SIGINT. And they didn't have a lot of it native. So they were pulling out of the 55th Wing and off it. And we were just running our Linguist through this RFF process. So you would go from Nebraska, you'd go deploy for 6 to 9 months, you'd come home, you'd rest, you'd go deploy again, come home, rest, go deploy again. And it was really hurting the linguist community, right? Because we weren't getting a lot of time to practice our language. People were getting burnt out. They were getting out of the community, out of the Air Force. So eventually the Air Force said, hey, we're not going to do this. We're not going to support this anymore because we got to protect the rivet joint community, which was a good decision, right? Like it was getting hard on the linguist. But around that same time, they stood up a new shred of the 1 Alpha 8 career field, which was just what that job was. So they broke it out. You could either be a 1 Alpha 8 linguist or you could be a 1 Alpha 8, what's called X2 now, which was the tactical systems operator, tactical support operator. So as soon as that happened, I immediately just put my name on the list and my shred changed, much to my career field manager's chagrin, because at the time I was a good passing linguist and I shouldn't have been allowed to leave, but I'm glad I did.
And so moving from being a linguist to being in signals intelligence, what do you think the most applicable or transferable skill was that you brought to signals intelligence?
The biggest thing, honestly, is, and this ended up, in my opinion, at least being a problem later on when we started pipelining people straight into the tactical systems. The amount of flexibility and intelligence personally you had to show to make it into the linguist career field was hard. Like it was a high washout rate school. It was very hard to get through DLI, get through Goodfellow, and make it to your first base, and then even then, make it through your check ride and all of that. Those skills, in my opinion, some of the best TIZOs later on were the ones that were former linguists. Not to say I've met some incredible ones that were straight off the street, enlisted into the Air Force as TIZOs, but I think the onboarding process there was just lighter, so a larger pool came in. But I think the best skill was just that adaptability, the flexibility, and the resiliency that came through having gone through the airborne linguist pipeline.
Yeah, so moving a little bit into like the future of the Air Force, how do you think signals intelligence is going to be utilized in the future fight, especially when we look across the Pacific?
I think it's going to be huge. I don't know exactly how it's going to look, but I do know that anything when we're talking about China specifically, it's all going to be in the electronic warfare space, right? Which SIGINT touches. There's a lot of bleed over between SIGINT and EW, but if you don't have dominance, I know the prevailing theory was that we have to have air dominance, and that's still important. We have to have air dominance, or at least some amount of superiority. But if we don't have electronic warfare or electronic spectrum dominance or electronic spectrum superiority, we're going to be dead before we can even get past the second island chain. I think the ability to exploit signals in the electronic spectrum and know what the enemy is doing in that space is going to be extremely important when we're looking at a competition or a fight with China, if it's outright.
And so do you see an increase in the number of SIGINT operators out there, or do you think that the Air Force already has enough and just going to be training them a little bit differently?
I think the training differently, absolutely. We've been so focused, like everybody else has, on counter VEO, and really we've gotten a little complacent and comfortable in that. It's hard doing real good hard SIGINT. Like it's not easy when you look at advanced military radios and how do we get after those? How do we figure out what's being passed through encrypted networks as opposed to just your off the shelf high terror radio that the terrorists were using, right? That absolutely is going to take a huge commitment on training, on currency, staying one step ahead. As far as do we need more? That's a tough one. I mean, I think a lot of what we're going to see in the future too is offboarding, right? So as much as it pains me as a flyer to say I might not be on the plane, right? And that I have to be okay with that. I think there's absolutely still going to be a space where we are going to see manned SIGINT flying on airplanes. It's just you're cutting out part of the decision chain and the timing chain of having me in the plane or somebody like me in the plane. But I think we'll also have to be supported by a pretty hefty offboarding process too.
And so when we talk about signals intelligence, it's a very technical career field. So do you see a future where AI is playing into the career field?
Absolutely. One of my last jobs before the weapons school was working kind of RDT&E type stuff at our group staff, trying to work on bringing new equipment in, testing new equipment, flight evaluating it, and getting it out to our airmen flying on the airplane. And one of the biggest things that me and my team were working on was trying to bring some sort of machine learning, AI capability into SIGINT, right? Because the biggest threat or challenge really with SIGINT is just how broad the electromagnetic spectrum is, right? There's stuff happening everywhere, and there's noise everywhere. So if you don't know quickly how to separate the noise from what is important, you're not going to get it before it matters. So I think we'd be very short-sighted to not bring that capability in, something that can help us sift through that massive amount of data, provide it to the human quickly, so that way the human can do what they do best and operate on it.
And so you kind of answered this question a little bit earlier with fewer flyers being on the airplane itself, but where do you see the future of SIGINT? Is it with the operators being on the ground and then someone else in the airplane?
Yeah, I mean, ideally, I like I said, I would like to see it be a blend. I think investing too much in only one thing is a disservice because we don't have flexibility then. In my opinion, the cool thing about Airborne SIGINT, especially in the soft realm, is like I said, right, we can flex very well. You can give me a couple Pelican cases with batteries, antennas, cables, and equipment, and you can put me on anything. I don't care if it's a boat, I don't care if it's an airplane with one engine or 5 engines, 6 engines, whatever, right? Like, you give me some space to hook all that up, and I will give you SIGINT, right? It doesn't matter. And that's especially important, I think, when you look at ACE, right, the Agile Combat Employment, and what we're proposing in that China scenario, right? The flexibility, the always moving, the not being predictable. If the enemy doesn't know what's a SIGINT aircraft and what is a SIGINT aircraft, it's a lot harder to protect themselves from collection, right? So if they're used to seeing a Marine CV-22 flying by every day and they just know, oh, that's a Marine supply aircraft, whatever. We don't have to be as OPSEC savvy maybe. But all of a sudden you throw a SIGINTer on that plane and now you're able to collect on something that if a rivet joint's flying by, all of China knows that rivet joint's there, from the military at least, you know, and they're going to posture themselves appropriately. But you throw a slick, you know, whatever, a C-21, right, a diplomatic transport, all of a sudden you throw some SIGINT on that, you know, maybe it's different, right? You throw it on a C-130, maybe it's different. So I think that's the great thing, right? So yeah, absolutely, we're going to be on the ground. We're going to be doing our SIGINT thing from wherever you want us to do it. But us having the flexibility to go where you need us to go is what I think one of our biggest strengths is.
And so you kind of mentioned it, talking about ACE. So, like, yeah, putting signals intelligence on, like, I'll say, like, less identifiable aircraft or less obvious aircraft in which signals intelligence is going to be collected. Where do you see the rivet joint in ACE?
Far away from the fight.
Yeah.
Right? Like, that's, you know, they're already termed, what is it, a high value airborne asset, right? HVAA. So that's something that we protect highly because it's important and it gives us great stuff. But it's not going to be on the front line as the, you know, 5th, 6th gen NJAD are going in doing what they're doing, right? So it's going to be further back. I think what we're going to, at least in my opinion, what we're going to see is that strategic operational SIGINT stays back, and hopefully with advances in technology, it can continue to have a good standoff distance and still provide valuable collection. I think the tactical SIGINT is going to absolutely still be moving in on the bleeding edge of whatever it is, right? Whether it's an invasion, what have you, posturing, staging, acing. I think they're still going to be there, right? And that's where you're going to see them flexing from asset to asset. And that's got some precedent too, right? I forget what they just called this, but when they tested the JASMs on C-130s and C-17s, right? Because that's a non-standard strike asset, and they just showed, and this was all public released by Air Force, that they can employ JASMs off of a cargo airplane. And now all of a sudden, China and Russia have to think, okay, was that just a cargo airplane moving plane or people? or is it a strike asset that can drop a JASM and hit a target that we didn't think they could hit before? So I think if you take that mentality and apply it to Intel and just say, hey, any of our planes can be Intel planes. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you think it's an Intel plane or not. Everything could and should be collecting.
Yeah, so I know a lot of times we're talking like on the offensive as the Americans, or like projecting our power where we want to project power. It's basically determined that we need to. When we kind of look at it on the flip side of things, where are we at in regards to signals intelligence versus our peer competition?
I think we're still in a pretty okay spot. Again, though, I think we've been not even complacent. You know, we were postured for a long time, 20 plus years, for counter VEO. And so that's where a lot of time, effort, money went into developing systems that were good at getting after that problem set. The shift is already happening. We're reallocating resources. We're re-optimizing for GPC. But there is a way to go still, right? I think we're still, I won't say woefully underprepared for exploiting the electromagnetic spectrum from a SIGINT EW perspective, but we definitely are behind where I think we should be. It takes a lot of money and a lot of time to get after hard encryption. Hard encryption is hard, right? NSA is really good at it from a defensive standpoint and from an offensive, but it's not something that you can just tell somebody, hey, go break this Chinese encrypted radio for me. Like, no, that takes some really smart people a lot of time to figure out how to do that. And then further, to then bring that into an airborne perspective where you can, while moving, gain valuable intel from a near real-time perspective, right? Those are all hard problems that take money and time.
Yeah. Awesome. That was a great answer. So when we talk a little bit about, your background, where you're coming from, so what made you want to enlist?
Fully candidly, I was working at a Starbucks as an assistant manager at the time. I was taking out the trash, having a cigarette, and I was like, this is BS. I gotta get out of here.
That's an awesome story. I love it.
Yeah, I'd gone to the recruiter once before, and I'd kind of backed out. I was like, I don't know if I want to do this. I'd let some friends talk me out of it. So the second time I went, I didn't tell anybody. I didn't tell my family, didn't tell any of my friends. I went, I signed every paper. I was like, I'm doing this. I'm only doing this if I can be an airborne linguist, because I'd done some research. I was like, that job sounds cool, AF. I want to go do that. So got it locked in, signed it all. In about a week or two before I left, I told my family, and they were super supportive and great about it. And I still didn't tell any of my friends. I just left one day.
That's great. Did you ever go back?
Yeah, I've been back a few times. Okay. Like, I had maybe 2 or 3 core friends I told, but at the time I wasn't running with the best group, so I didn't want anybody trying to pressure me or convince me to not do something. So I just bounced. Sometimes you just got to pull chocks and roll.
Yeah, for sure. No, how old were you when you enlisted?
I was, let's see, 20. I think I turned.
Okay, so it wasn't that far after high school.
No. Yeah, I dabbled at college. I went to UT Austin, Hookham for a few semesters unsuccessfully. And when that didn't work out, I was like, all right, I got to have a plan B. And was pretty much Air Force and Starbucks. And I love my coffee, so I had to go dabble in Starbucks for a little bit.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And so you said that you wanted to go airborne linguist all the way.
Yep.
Was it just airborne linguist period, or did you have a language in mind?
At the time, I actually did want Korean. My uncle, he was Army for forever, and he's still Army now as a contractor. A civilian. He's I think a GS-14, maybe a GS-15. But anyways, he spent most of his career in Korea. Ended up getting married over there. My aunt Gina is incredible, and so I just kind of selfishly was like, yeah, Korean would be fun. I wasn't really thinking strategically or anything about I should learn this because the Russians or the Chinese. I was just like, no. I always liked language growing up. I thought it was cool. I spoke Spanish a lot growing up. And just the idea of flying, I was like, I'm not going to join the Air Force and not fly. So it's got to be flight, and language sounded cool.
What, outside of signals intelligence and being an airborne linguist, what other aviation-related career field, like airborne career field, would you pick on the enlisted side of things?
Loadmaster.
And why?
Loadmasters, I don't know. It's such a sweet gig. They can go anywhere. They travel a lot. You get to hang out the back of planes. On quite a few deployments, I moonlighted as a loadmaster. Some of the planes we flew on could be multi-purpose, SIGINT and mobility. And I would fly with a lot of loadmasters, and just, I don't know, man, like, it seems like the dream job. Like, just great. They all seem pretty happy. Yeah, it's pretty sweet.
It's a pretty cool career.
Airborne gunner would be sweet too. Which is
Airborne
now,
gunner.
I think,
That
what,
would be awesome.
1 Alpha 9, I think is what they're calling them now, special mission aviators. So it's kind of like a blend of flight engineer, gunner, and maybe loadmaster. I don't remember.
Because there's enlisted on the AC-130.
Oh,
like,
absolutely.
Well, I know there's like on like reloading, but on the gunship, like the actual guns, right? Because I know one of them it's an officer enlisted.
All release of munitions is technically done by an officer, but it's the sweaties in the back that are doing the hard work.
Yeah.
Pulling out the hot shells.
I've seen the videos.
Loading up new ones, yeah.
That's a cool job.
Yeah.
Kind of backtrack a little bit. What would you say is the biggest difference between the officer and enlisted corps?
Really, I would say the responsibility, I guess. You all, I'm in awe of every day, for what you're doing here, because this place is crazy. In a good way sometimes, but also not in a good way sometimes.
Exactly.
But your ability to manage all this and then go in, and from day one, right, you have a completely different perspective on the military than I have had for my entire 18 years, right? Like, you are going to be in charge of people's lives. You are going to be in charge of whether they live or die in some cases, depending on what your job is, right? And from an aviation standpoint too, right? As pilots, weapons release authorities, all that jazz, right? Like, you have a fully different perspective. So to me, that's the biggest difference, right? Like, I mess up, bad things can still happen and whatnot. But for an officer, I think the stakes are just higher, right? Like, you have the whole system just being different, right?
Yeah, and so when we talk about the enlisted side and we talk about the NCO Corps, leaders have said in the past that our NCO Corps is one of the reasons why the United States is so dominant. Why do you think that is?
Honestly, I think it's trust mostly. Like I alluded to earlier, right? Not once on a deployment did I go in somewhere and immediately there was a trust relationship that based on, for one, rank, sure, but two, just the fact that that's how our military is structured, that there's trust that I will be the expert at my job. And that if you ask me to go do it, I will go do it. I'll go do it well. If I don't do it well, I will learn it quickly and I will fix it and I will get better at it, right? Like, that's how this all works. Trust, delegation of authority too, right? You don't see that in every other military where we delegate authority down to the NCO Corps and say, hey, go out and do based on commander intent. That's something that we do very well, right? Like, I don't need to go check in with my boss every day and see what his priorities are. I know his priorities. I know what's important to him or her, and I'm going to go out and execute that even if I haven't talked to them in a week, right? So if we do get disconnected in ACE or I'm separated, I'm not just going to stop working because nobody told me what to do, right? Like, I know what our goal is, at least when I left the mission briefing room. And until somebody tells me differently, I'm going to go do that, right? And I think that's a huge asset to us that we don't see. I mean, we've seen that in Russia and Ukraine already, that their NCO Corps doesn't do that. Sometimes if the officer's dead, they just stop.
It also doesn't help when you get your fighters from a prison camp.
Fair. Valid point.
And it sounds like that philosophy of the NCOs can do it all. They're super trustworthy. They have a lot of responsibility. It feels like that philosophy is brought back to the academy with the AMTs in the squadrons. Did you always want to come to the academy to be an AMT, or is that just kind of something that happened?
And did you want to, or were you voluntold?
Oh, no. So I first heard about this gig, I think probably in 2011, 2012, when I was still at Bragg. Immediately, I was a tech at the time. I went and applied for it. I was like, this sounds incredible. And I was still doing awesome stuff then. Like, I was doing incredible things and I was loving it. But the idea of coming here and being able to like interact with future leaders in their early formative stages and kind of like, I don't want to say download knowledge, but impress upon you all kind of some of our life lessons, to me is, I think, one of the coolest things the Air Force has ever done. I think it's really... hopefully enlightening for you all. I don't know. I know not all of us are great, but we try. And so, yes, I absolutely applied. So I applied 3 times for this job, got it on the 3rd try. My career field's been super undermanned for most of my time, so they were very hesitant to let people leave. And it wasn't until much later, until I hit master and things started changing on the back end with our career field manager, that I got the green light to come out here.
So a follow-up question on that. What's one lesson that you hope cadets take away from an interaction with you?
Oh, man, that's deep. One lesson from interactions with me. Always find a way to yes. Your answer, your default should never be no, right? Like, we're the military, GD it. Our job is to get stuff done. So if somebody comes to you in whatever career field, I don't care if you're logistics, finance, pilot, maintenance, whatever. If your default answer is no, we can't do that, it's time for you to leave. Like, the answer should be yes. Like, figure out along the way why we're trying to do it. Like, if it doesn't make sense, okay, that's a different story. But what really bugs me and irks me about the military sometimes is when you run into people who, for whatever reason, whether they're jaded, disgruntled, but their default answer is, no, we can't do that. So don't be that person.
I'll try my best.
Yes.
Yeah.
So when we talk about, the academy is producing officers, and those officers are going to oversee enlisted personnel. So how do you think the academy can improve to better prepare graduates to care for and interact with the enlisted force?
Go hands off way more. Like, let me preface this in case my bosses are listening. The views expressed after this are fully mine, and in no way, shape, or form constitute the views of CS25 or my leadership. I think we coddle y'all way too much. Your day from 6:08, which is insane that it's not just 6:10 or 6:05, from 6:08 to 17:42 is fully planned out. And if you're not exactly where you need to be right when you need it, somebody's crawling up your butt being and then we're giving you 30 reminders to do things all the time. We just got to pull back. You got to let people fail. We're supposed to be giving you a chance to lead and learn, make mistakes. I'd rather you make mistakes here 1,000 times than go out there and make a mistake and then people are getting hurt or their careers are getting jacked up because you didn't do something right. So I think that's where our strength should be with having us here is we're here so when you do F up, we can pick you up, be all right, what'd you do wrong? What'd you learn? And what are we going to do different next time? But you can't do that if we're not giving you the chance to.
I 100% agree. I will caveat, as my AMT, I do appreciate the CE quiz reminders. Fantastic.
That's only because I don't like getting yelled at. You're keeping us free. I don't like getting yelled at about why everybody doesn't have their damn CE quizzes done.
I have lots of opinions. Yeah. I will not share those opinions right now.
Yeah.
But okay, so kind of coming back to the Air Force and aviation. So what do you think the best it's a tradition here. What do you think the best aircraft is in the Air Force inventory today and why?
Acknowledged inventory.
Well, of course, yeah. I mean, we can't. I mean, if you want to tell us about a Green Door project, no, I'm just kidding.
I'd love that.
I saw this.
We would all go to prison.
Yeah, this was the hardest one to think about. So ever since I was a little kid, my favorite airplane in the Air Force has been the A-10. I just think it's hands down the coolest looking, coolest mission, most badass, flying tank, awesome. Looking back now, no disrespect to the A-10 community, I still feel that way. Working with Sandys is awesome. They're great. It's got to be the C-130. It's just a beast. It's a workhorse. It does anything and everything you want the Air Force to do. I think when the proverbial S hits the fan, it's going to be C-130s that keep us rolling. They're unstoppable. Everything from Slick J's to HC-130s, EC-130s, MC-130s, AC-130s, WC-130s. I mean, it does everything. So shout out to my boys in the C-130 community. It's got to be them.
It's a pretty dope aircraft.
It's a really impressive airframe.
Yeah. And it's been around for what? When did it roll out? The 60s? 70s maybe?
I'm looking up the answer right now.
The first, it might have even been the 50s. Clearly we're getting new ones still.
August 23rd, 1954, according to Lockheed Martin's
which
website.
They would know. They make it.
Yeah, that's wild.
Yeah,
C5 in 1969 when we landed on the moon. That was last episode. But
that's also the last time a C5 flew.
I have heard that.
Yeah.
Well, any closing remarks before we wrap it up?
Hey, I really appreciate you reaching out. I think it's cool, with the dynamic here at the Academy, mostly officers, I get it, mostly officers on your podcast. But it blew my mind when I got here how many of you all didn't know that enlisted people fly for a living. There's 7 or 8 different career enlisted aviator AFSCs. I think it's awesome that you all decided to reach out. I did not pressure him to do this, even though he is in my squadron. I was shocked when he asked me.
We literally know. We've been. People have hit us up on Instagram. Like, people have talked to me. People prior E's here have talked to people on the team. It's like, you guys gotta branch out to enlisted aviation related career fields. I'm like, I wasn't necessarily hesitant. I didn't know the right way to do it. And how to approach the situation.
You started with the best, arguably, and the nerdiest. So, take that as it is. There are some way cooler, I won't say way cooler. There's also equally cool enlisted aviation jobs too. So I would love to help you kind of line up and get some of them on here too. I know quite a few that came through my cohort as well are here at the Academy. So we're around, man.
We definitely need a load master. That's what
yes.
I need to talk to a load
now
master.
That we know.
You are going to need the beep button or the for all the cuss words with the load master. You got to watch them. They're going to censor button them. But yeah.
Well, sir, thanks so much for coming on the show. As a reminder to everybody at home, these episodes are on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, along with our newly launched YouTube channel. We're going to be having our new episodes uploaded there, the Flyover Podcast, with our clips on the Flyover Podcast Clips channel. Our legacy episodes 1 through 15, are still only going to be on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, and always our clips are on YouTube Shorts and Instagram Reels. With that, we will catch you all in the next one.